explaining to the people in the room who are going to hear it a second time, we have Pebble Pocket, which is a mobile app. So it's an app to use on your mobile device. Now, one of the either benefits or not benefits, it depends on how you set up your learning tasks and your teaching tools, is that Pebble is very template driven. So when the students go into Pebble, the administrator or the instructor, the teacher, the lecturer has had to either use a standard template or to actually design one themselves. For me, the benefit of the template is that I'm able to really guide and scaffold my students' learning. So, for example, in my professional practice internship, I want the students to focus on 5 things. And so inside that template, I've designed 5 very specific questions, and I've left spaces within their folio to actually complete answers to those questions. So that's the really key thing for me. That really helps me. Because I'm working specifically with music and performance and creative students in my faculty, some of the less than happy people might say the template is far too restrictive and that for them doesn't allow for any creativity. Now, this is feedback that we've given to Pebble quite a few times, and they've come back to us and said, well, we can adapt that to try and make sure that you have an opportunity to put your own creativity in there. So I have to continue to reinforce to my students that whilst the technology is there as the tool or the vehicle through which they're accessing their learning, it is really about documenting their learning outcomes for enhanced employability. This is a key objective that I'm really getting to them. Many of my students will find that the technology is sometimes a little immature for them, and that's because the world that they're working on has a great deal of technology embedded in it. So for the composers, for the music technologists, and sometimes even for the education students, it doesn't have the maturity of technology for them. But I say to them, that they can actually manipulate it around however they'd like to. I come back to the fact that it's about them connecting and sharing. So they connect and share through Facebook, through perhaps LinkedIn. I think that seems to be getting a little bit more popular with tertiary students than perhaps it was before. But if they understand the ideas about connecting and sharing, then they should be using the technology to actually advance that skill for themselves. So how do I allow them to actually tailor the design of the tools for each of their specialisations? I've got to say that not being the technology queen, I do quite often get a lot of help from various different people. The other thing that I've really noticed with any of these portfolio platforms is there are some tremendous help videos and help pages and almost online tutorials for some of them. Now, whilst I've worked exclusively with Pebble, I can say that over the time they've really addressed those sorts of questions about how do you manipulate the technology, and they keep coming back and saying it's a learning tool. So you're actually using it to the benefit of what you're trying to actually do. The important part for me is that I've embedded the process inside the curriculum, and so the students see it as a part of their whole learning. It's not a different part of their learning, and I think that's really key. So I always say to them that your ePortfolio is actually a learning story, and regardless of what platform you have, you should be able to at least assist your students to create a Word or a PDF file and upload that to the platform that they're using. That should not be a difficult task. If we start with just those very basic things of creating a piece of evidence that is actually realistic and authentic and does the job, which is giving evidence of your learning, then I find that they grow quite quickly into a more advanced or a more, technologically challenging stage of, you know, recording sound files and video files and, you know, editing various, you know, PowerPoints perhaps, you know, or presentations that they've done. And I find that they do actually move that way towards understanding the technology a lot better. I suppose my message in this one as being a learning story is that I want to keep taking the ePortfolio process and product back to being learning. The technology is perhaps a challenge or a roadblock, but it's not to be taken away from the fact that this is good learning. It's engaging the students, it's giving them an opportunity to self-regulate their learning, and it's continuing for them to making it a lifelong learning process, this whole degree, study, you know, tertiary experience, and that's what we want it to be. And I want them to value their own intellectual growth. So if they don't actually understand that it's a story of their own learning, then I don't think that they've got to that next stage. So Pebble very much markets and is set up for it to be a personal learning environment. So it's a learning space where the students do explore and they do also trial and test a whole range of different ways of creating this portfolio. I ask them in every assessment task, and ePortfolio is embedded to maybe up to 15 units of study that I can think of just inside our degree program. I ask them every time to either create an activity, a thought, a reflection, and now these are all drop-down toolbar, you know, from the Pebble platform, so that's actually quite unique to there, because I want them to be able to take control or to self-manage what they're learning, and that's why I ask them to reflect. As I think we've mentioned before, you know, we don't do well in critical thinking, and we need to continue to encourage our critical thinking. So I always say to them, with our platform Pebble, it's centrally supported and it's safe. It's private. It can't be seen, and I think that's a real advantage for students that are starting off on this portfolio journey. I do encourage them by the end of their 4 years of their degree program, though, to start exploring outside this, this safe or closed environment that we've got in our platform. They should be trying to create web pages to advertise the skills and to, you know, have a digital identity that's not Facebook. And I think that, you know, seeing more students joining LinkedIn is not necessarily me being convinced that the message is getting through, but I suppose it's showing me that they do know that there is social media and there is media that, or a digital world that works with, you know, another world. The question here is there opportunity for integration into other virtual learning spaces when you use an ePortfolio platform such as Pebble? I think that there is opportunity for that, but I think what we really need to be quite clear about is this is still a training ground. They're at university or in higher education to explore and to experiment and to practice and to learn. So if nothing else, I feel the development of the ePortfolio as a product, but also the process that they go through to develop this ePortfolio contributes to their learning. And I think that's one of the really key things that we need to keep saying back to our students when they say to us, I can't get this uploaded to Pebble, it doesn't work. And I've just had, you know, probably 25 performers that had to use Pebble to reflect on some work they did, some orchestral work that they did with the Australian Opera and Ballet Orchestra. And, you know, I had emails all weekend that they were due yesterday or just today, midnight last night. Had emails all weekend saying it's attached in an email to you. And I would write back to them and say, no, you must try and upload it to Pebble. And the response was always, I can't seem to do it. And so then I'd sort of send them back to the online help or the guides, and they'd work out. So I think you need to stand strong. I think you need to say that the technology is not the barrier. The technology is actually part of their learning, and it's an opportunity for them to actually expand the way that they think. So the technology, you know, they already have social media that's a pedagogical design, things like YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud. I think I avoid technocentric dialogue. That's one of my key things. I don't try and talk about the technology, mainly because it's not my strength, but I also want to keep bringing it back to the learning all the time. There is easily accessible online information for them to get there. And because Pebble for us at Sydney University, and I'm sure at Charles Sturt, has a centrally supported network, they can always call their centrally supported e-learning or tech people to help them. The focus has to be on concepts, and we have to keep telling them what's in it for them. The relevancy of the technology is the key part for me in this sense. And, you know, I always get back to the fact that they're establishing a persona and identity, both a professional and a personal one, through engaging with this technology. I don't want to say to them, oh, you're a digital native, you know, and touch them on the shoulder with my magic wand and say, no, it's happened. You know, it's hard. They've got to try and it's like anything. I'm sure a lot of people studying quite a few subjects in their degree programs, you know, come across a lot of barriers because the work is actually hard. And I think we have to stop apologising for things being challenging or difficult, and I think we have to just ask them to continue trying to meet those challenges as they're there. You can find out more about the OLT project that Patsy and Jenny Monday and myself are engaged in. They've got a project website there. It also has information from our past OLT project that I worked on with Western Sydney Uni and Curtin Uni and Griffith University. If you've got any questions now, I'm really happy to answer them. And then Patsy's going to actually give some examples of the technology and the platforms from the UNSW perspective. But any questions, I'm quite happy to ask those now. Look, I think that that's a really good question, Sandra, whether or not ePortfolios are only created as a capstone or individual subjects have full ePortfolios. I think you've got to be really clear about how ePortfolios are used within your subject area. And I think you need to feel quite confident that it can become a capstone. It can actually, you know, be worked upon in a whole range of different subjects to then actually end up in a capstone unit. So I hope that kind of answers your question. If there are more questions, and that's fine for people to keep typing on the way through, we might let Patsy start now with her technology story here at UNSW, and I introduce Patsy Polly.
Thanks, Jennifer. So, as Jennifer's mentioned, the technology is really, even though it's a bit of the title of this presentation, it's really not the focus that we like to talk about, but it's more or less an accessory to the learning journey that our students are taking. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story of ePortfolio for building skills and self-directed learning in medical science here at UNSW Australia. So it's an interesting story in that we have tried to stick with some institutional priorities for graduates in implementing ePortfolio. And these come under these classic concepts of our students needing to be global citizens, scholars, leaders, and professionals. So we teach a lot in our courses, and especially in medical science and the sciences, the courses are very content heavy, and there's a lot of practical components to those courses. But what we are trying to do now is build professional skills for our students so they can come out after the graduation and be global citizens and scholars and leaders and professionals, as this triangular grid tells us. So with that in mind, we wanted to understand that building skills and the self-directed learning that our students are experiencing as part of their coursework and their degree programs is foundational to them becoming these well-rounded individuals when they graduate. So ePortfolio in the medical sciences has been interesting in that we tend to talk about it as a student-centric resource for reflective practice on learning and research skills building. Well, that's how we started off, especially trying to get students to understand that they need to understand how to build their research thinking and practice. However, we also, in the process of doing this, realised that we needed to get their reflection and their perspectives on their professional practices and their skills development, the authentic skills development, and of course personal achievements. And these are all issues that Jennifer has touched upon actually. That whole rounded behavioural profile that we're trying to get students to develop. So some of you may have seen this before, maybe not. We in the medical science program have tried to implement our process in a longitudinal manner via a program-wide approach of ePortfolio use. And what that did was make sure that we aligned certain subjects and assessment tasks from years 1 to 4. That was in the program-wide manner. So when doing this, we actually used Mahara ePortfolio. And at that time, Mahara ePortfolio was under pilot assessment at the University of New South Wales. And it was a very valuable process for us as academics to have the opportunity to implement Mahara, in that it was pretty structured and it gave students another format that they could follow, similar to what Jennifer was describing for PebblePad. So it was nice in that we could get students to transfer their behaviours, thinking, skills development, concepts, assessment, learning from year 1 into year 4. So it was a longitudinal effect overall, with the idea that upon graduation or upon entry into other situations, whether they were pathways into further studies, research or industry, our students would have taken this learning journey and this narrative with them and formed that identity as medical scientists. So this is what we did with Mahara, and we did this pretty effectively for a few years, in that we were able to see some sort of development of professional readiness and an element of career awareness that wasn't really present before we implemented ePortfolio through Mahara. However, when building skills, we wanted to also ask students to recognise that those skills were transferable across disciplines. So we figured the best place to start with this, actually, transfer of skills, would be across the disciplines that we teach in medical science within the School of Medical Science. So these include anatomy, pathology, pharmacology and physiology. That's not to say that students weren't able to transfer skills already, especially from years 1 into 2, but now learning research skills across disciplines within medical science in particular, they could transfer their knowledge, their skills, their ideas across the things that we were teaching. And there was overlap, and that's what we wanted students to understand, that they were developing a subset of skills that were transferable and overlapping and useful. So we've done this a bit further with a grant that supported us here at the University of New South Wales to align these skills across the disciplines, and we started looking at those graduate capabilities to fit into that triangular grid that I presented earlier, with the idea that we build professional skills, lifelong learning, and something that students could take with them beyond UNSW. So the skill that we decided to focus on, which is a skill that most of us have trouble with, is the concept of teamwork. So we like to work as teams theoretically, but in practice we have problems. And it's not always obvious when you start off with a team, but we figured that we needed to build skills in our students that included skills such as negotiation, time management, and collaboration. So these were the skills that we started to work with. But in doing that, we had a transition. And the transition was the coming back to the actual platform and the technology. So at first we were concerned about our students having used Mahara in years 1 and 2. And now we were asking them to do something that was totally out there, totally self-directed, and not institutionally supported per se. So we asked them to move to a technology called WordPress. They could also use other systems like Blogger, but we recommended WordPress because it was pretty straightforward. So we didn't want the students to get too tangled up in the technology itself, but to focus on their learning journey. And we were hopeful that the technology would be adopted as they went along. So interestingly enough, as we started to implement WordPress, as Jennifer said, we were consistent with asking students not to submit Word files in emails because that was the easy way out. But we did ask them to keep building their profile in the new system of WordPress. And what we found was not only did they gain a bit of confidence in doing that, but they grew into spaces and reflective practice and using the system in ways that we didn't anticipate. So this was a great, great outcome for us. So I'll just show you a few examples of how we've transitioned over time and just to show you how the systems can look. So this is an example of a Mahara ePortfolio. And it's course-oriented in that we've asked Ronnie to reflect on various research laboratories that were presented throughout the course that I run, which is a pathology course for third-year students. And the students asked to reflect and write up a lab book throughout the semester. And they reflect on approximately 7 different research laboratories that are presented by experts in the field. And you can see that Ronnie has more or less used the portfolio space in Mahara to take notes. And this was our starting point because it was a bit difficult for students to transition to reflective practice, being stuff collecting scientists that we are. So it was a nice way for students to start, but thankfully and interestingly, we saw some reflective practice that was pretty cool in that students like Ronnie started to identify different skills that they were building as part of doing their lab practice. That included the career-specific skill that I mentioned earlier, an awareness of professional practice, and also giving some course feedback. So all of a sudden that reflective space became quite rich, but it was pretty structured. And you can see it was pretty simple in the way that Ronnie had reported his reflection. Now, we were very happy to see this, and this was us also starting off as teachers learning the technology and learning about ePortfolio use and practice. But as our students grew, so did we. And you can see this is a student, Gabriella, who's used Portfolio across a couple of years, across a few subjects, and has started to take more ownership of her space. So she's including different images, writing reflective pieces as we've expected her to do in the past, but also including web links, which we found sort of cool, and also talking about her experiences. So it was a hybridized version of what we were hoping. So it was not only text, and reflection, but all of a sudden she was getting comfortable with uploading images, adapting those images to talk about how she felt about pathology, and also including her presentation as a link, a web link. So this was very good, and the web links led back to her assessment. Actually, we do use the portfolio to work with assessment strategies and tasks in order to build those skills. So that's one of the ways of maybe starting out with ePortfolio use if you're thinking about it as a teacher. But there's more. We recently, as I mentioned, moved to WordPress, and you can see all of a sudden that the student has taken complete ownership of that space. And we were so pleased to see something like this come about, because what Claire's done, she's created these tabs across her ePortfolio page that talk about the course that I run, but also her thoughts, the research labs that we present every year, her reflections, her teamwork reflections, which was a skill we were asking the students to develop, and how she went on that journey. And the reality is she's uploaded all these wonderful images which tell us that she has an interest beyond just using words. Okay, so the study of pathology is very interesting in that it is descriptive, and it does rely on a lot of imagery. So for students to turn around and start writing big slabs of text, it's a very unorthodox behaviour in our students. So writing text to then suit some of the imagery that Claire has presented in her WordPress has been a nice hybridisation again of the way she's producing thoughts on her journey through pathology. So again, this is another bit, and she's got her portfolio sort of tabs here that she talks about, her presentations, different research labs, the team meetings, because we ask students to talk about their collaborative behaviours and their learning in that space. But the cool thing here, and I started to look at this over the weekend, she's uploaded a film that she's created. Well, I assume she's created it, and it's images of, for example, HIV-infected T cells. So maybe not that exciting to the general public, but to a pathologist, it's fabulous. We love to see images like this. So what Claire's done is she's moved across, and you've got this rolling, beautiful film of all this imagery that is generated in research labs of different disease analysis and states. But she's linking that, sort of hybridizing that visual space back into a bit of a chat about her reflections and what she's learnt. So yes, we did implement a bit of structure, as Jennifer mentioned, because we figured the students are going from a very structured, institutionally regulated platform, Mahara, to something that's more open-ended and self-directed as a platform. So to sort of get them started, we did ask them to address a few questions as part of having them think about their learning journey. So again, as teachers going through this process, it helped us. I think it's a bit hard for students to start writing a whole lot of stuff without a bit of scaffolding or a bit of structure. So it helped us also because it gave us a way of searching for things that we wanted to see. Okay, so it's not only about the technology and the learning process and the journey, but what are the outcomes? What outcomes are we looking at when we're going for this learning process and journey? So these are some of the outcomes that I'm reporting on today, that the skills appear to have been started to be developed anyway in terms of the reflections that we get, and also the digital literacy that we see has definitely started for some of our students, where they're very comfortable with uploading slides, film, web links, and so on. So that was Claire's portfolio. So there's a bit of a conclusion to this story, and we started off with ePortfolio in a very institutional sort of structured framework as a reflective tool linked to certain assessment tasks, because we found that would be the easiest place for concrete learners like scientists to start, because if you're asking them to write a whole lot of reflection without anything to link it to, it would have been just a bit too out there. So the assessment tasks have been brilliant in helping us as teachers as well communicate to students that this is a way of building those skills. This is a skills building process, not only just a whole lot of content and other things that you may learn at university, but the professional skills overlie that. It's very important to understand that for students. And in doing that, the hybrid of those two, or the merging of those two effects, has given us the impression that students seem to be improving in their graduate capabilities, or at least we're able to see those graduate capabilities develop. In the past, it was more or less anecdotal. Us as teachers, we had a feeling it was happening. But now the brilliance of the ePortfolio space gives us a chance to really grab that opportunity to see the development in process and in progress. So it's actually a bit of evidence that we can hold on to as teachers as well, and say, look, they have these skills all of a sudden because they're telling us comfortably that they can do it. So communication and teamwork skills development has been an outcome of our ePortfolio journey. And actually, I don't think this development has been hindered by technology. So the technology has been good in terms of using structured technology to start us off, and it's been good in letting students then propel and propagate into an unstructured platform and space. So we've sort of been lucky here in that we've had the opportunity to test run two spaces with the same set of students going through the program. So in that regard, it's been an interesting journey as teachers, where we thought, oh, our students may not like this, but what it's done is have the training effect in a structured way, and then the development effect in an unstructured way, if that makes sense. So that's been a really nice journey for us to see as teachers at UNSW, teachers of medical science, and developing those skills. Because let's face it, upon graduation, not all of us will want to be medical doctors or research scientists, so there could be other communication worlds that we want to enter, and this is definitely providing us a space to evidence that. So, okay, so I haven't acknowledged Jennifer here because Jennifer has been instrumental in general in the OLT grant. Now, this sort of work is where the acknowledgement page sits here. And these are the colleagues that we work together with, because if we're trying to do this programmatically, it's all right to do it in a bitsy approach like we started with, and we found this was not effective. So we've engaged each other's expertise, each other's thinking behind assessment tasks and alignment, and work together to try and get a set of criteria that speak to those teamwork and communication skills. So altogether, we've come up with a process for at least looking at those graduate attributes. And of course, the students who were very kind to share their documents with us. And I haven't put Gabriella up here, but Gabriella Lay was the hot pink pathology slide that I quite like, because she's flipping the table on pathology and telling us something different there. So with that, I'd like to conclude my part of the webinar, and I'm happy to take questions on the journey that we've had in terms of the technology. And I've also got other colleagues in the room here who have been quite important in supporting us with the technologies and informing us on the different spaces that can be used. It is a journey, and I don't think that the technology hinders it in any way. In fact, it's there to support. Our students can do things we can't, as it turns out, in terms of digital literacy. Definitely, I don't think I'd be very good at uploading a video of pathology slides, but there you go. One of our third years is doing it proficiently and beautifully. So these are wonderful things that we're experiencing here.
There's a question, Patsy, did you find WordPress to be more flexible?
Yes. Now, yes, in that the way the pages look, the way the students import or upload their information definitely tells me that there's an element of flexibility. Not having to log in via a UNSW site, that's flexible. Yeah, so there are different ways. It's like a blog page. It's a blogging site. So students are very comfortable using that sort of environment. They're good at Facebook, so it's, you know, it probably draws elements of Facebook out into WordPress. To be honest with you, I'm not proficient at any technology. Most of us are not, because we're really hell-bent on trying to get the pedagogy through. But even I could do WordPress, so I found it quite flexible in that regard. And there were no complaints when we were implementing WordPress.
Heidi's just
Typing?
and
Okay.
it says, is anyone using OneNote?
Not in our particular course, but we kept it pretty open, to be honest. We gave students all sorts of options, so not with us, but I'm sure if in the future it may be the case.
I'm going to come and sit up with Patsy now.
Yep.
Because
multiple
attendees are typing.
Yikes.
So maybe we can
Excellent.
both answer the
Tag
questions.
team.
Yeah, and tag team. I've never said to my students that they absolutely must use Pebble. I just say that that's one that I think they should use because it's supported centrally by the university. And I did have one student was actually using WordPress.
Right.
Because they thought it was more suited to what they wanted to develop as in a graduate capability or for their future than using Pebble. So I allowed them to use that. But that was one student out of, I think, 120 this year. So there you go. Heidi said that she's looking at using OneNote as an option because she wants to give students options, including WordPress. So I suppose that, Heidi, that fits in with my experience as well. And I'm hoping that, you know, now that we're in our 5th year of ePortfolio assessments embedded into our degree program, in our music degree program, that students are going to start thinking a little bit more for themselves and maybe even starting to create some opportunities to explore a bit more technology. There's a question here that Patsy might want to answer. It's how to encourage students to actually do their ePortfolio, and do you have problems during the ePortfolio implementation?
Okay, so the way we encourage students, as Jennifer mentioned, we have we start them off with a bit of a structured set of questions that they should address by a certain time, and that's at the beginning of semester. So they've got about a week and a half to turn that around, and that gets the thinking started. And we tend to implement certain things throughout the semester to engage the students. So the assessment tasks. Oh, hello, that's it. Hi. So the assessment tasks are very important in engaging student behaviour and processes in learning. Yeah, so we stage it throughout the semester, various assessment tasks, questions, submissions, and students have been quite happy to do that. And of course we tag a little bit of assessment percentage to that to ensure that they do submit something at dedicated time slots and schedules according to their assessment.
And I have to agree with that. We did not have any success whatsoever in implementing the ePortfolio without tying it to a small assessment. I think I might have said before that I don't ever grade it. You know, if it's 10 marks or 10% of their course, I don't give them a graded mark. If they've completed the requirements according to my rubric, then you know they'll get the 10 marks. So it's more a completion, a participation, I suppose, if you want to see it that way. But I do find that students do a really, really good job and some do a poor job, so not all of them get the 10 marks. There's another question here about what do they do with their portfolios once they're finished? And I think that's a terrific question. I'll just answer first because I'm sitting in front now, and then Patsy can say something. Our students, if they do use Pebble, then they have given them a free lifetime use of a Pebble account. So they're migrated from the Sydney Uni branded Pebble, so they no longer need their UniKey login to get into it. So they then go into a personal account. I hope that my students will have a portfolio that doesn't look anything like the one they finished with in fourth year by the time they've done their first or second year outside of university. I'm hoping that the skills that I've engaged them in along the way has given them enough understanding that that they continue to grow as individuals and not just as students. But Patsy may have a different opinion on what happens with their portfolios?
Yeah, well, the idea is to keep the students growing, without a doubt. And I've had the experience with actually two of the three students I presented today, Ronnie and Gabriella, have taken that ePortfolio learning beyond UNSW into a medical degree and into another health science degree. I think it's speech pathology. And they were saying, thank goodness for that ePortfolio experience, because now we've got our own ePortfolios through our graduate programs that we're managing, and we're able to self-direct a little bit more. So again, it's another ePortfolio space, but we've also let the students know that these portfolios are now a digital CV. So there's something you can show and tell to employers beyond this paper version type thing, because people don't want to see that anymore. They want to click on a link and have a look at who you are, who you've become. So students are now taking ownership, because all of a sudden you've got to sort of pitch it to the student as well. If students can't see where the potential lies, they may not take it. Others might. So that's those two. I've got another student who graduated today actually, and he's doing portfolio work in a graduate medical program in WA, and he's so grateful as well. So he's taking that process beyond UNSW, and I was very happy for that. As medical doctors and actually research scientists, they have to reflect on their learning. They have to reflect on their experimental work. So they will do that as a lifelong process. We did it haphazardly somehow, we managed, but these guys I think will be in a much better space to do it.
Thanks. Look, it's a really interesting question that Andrew's asked there of whether or not I think this would work for distance students or whether it's only going to work for face-to-face. It's probably not something that I've really thought too much about, because we don't have any distance or online students enrolled in our degree program, but I'm being very, uni-centric here. That's just my world. Yep. Maybe some of the people that are at Charles Sturt, where you are across multiple campuses, and I know quite a few of the people in the webinar are actually from Charles Sturt, maybe they could give us a bit more of an idea about whether or not it can and does work in a distance environment.
So Marcel has said
that. Marcel says that she's used EduBlogs for distant postgrad instructions, but she needs to do lots of screenshots of instructions. Heidi said that she's got equal online and face-to-face students, and so far her experience is that for students who are part-time, they find it great because it actually refocuses them when they return, especially if they take time out. So there's a couple of examples of people that's saying that it is working successfully in a distance and a part-time area. Look, I'm conscious that we're a couple of minutes to 5. So maybe if we just have another 1 or 2 questions. Sandra's just written to Andrew there that it should work fine, providing it's planned. That's one of the key things. And I probably support that. I think any you know, I'm not going to say all good learning is planned, but successful learning does have an element of planning and flexibility in it, but definitely it has to be part of it being mapped across a curriculum somewhere so that it's got meaning in a whole range of different, you know, parts of the learning that you're doing. Jenny Monday, who's Patsy and my partner in this OLT research project, says yes, embedded into a Master of Ed students, which must have been distance, I'm thinking, or part-time, gave it very positive responses. Okay, well, look, thank you to UNSW for hosting this webinar today. I think our third webinar is actually going to be coming from either Charles Sturt or from the University of Canberra. We'll see how that works. Yes. And thank you very much to Patsy for organising it here, and to Brian in the background, and to Belinda also from our Learning and Teaching. Oh, not mine, I'm not at UNSW, but from the UNSW Learning and Teaching to support us here as well. But oh, sorry, I'll keep going out of view because I'm, you know, not wondering which way I'm going. So. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody that's saying thank you to us. I think I'm going to continue to have lots of difficulty with platforms, and I'm not sure whether Patsy's going to continue to having difficulties with platforms.
I have all sorts of difficulties with platforms, especially technology, but the reality is we're learning from our students as well, guys. So this is the amazing journey that we've taken as educators, that we've taken the risk, and we think it's paid off in that students have taken control and taken us with them.
Yeah,
so it's very exciting in itself.
And I think that that's probably something you only dream of, and it's actually happening. So that's tremendous. Please go onto the website. You'll find lots of examples of student portfolios in there. The ones from Sydney Uni will all be pretty much Pebble, but there are other examples from other institutions there too. And look, we welcome anyone that would like to share examples of their portfolio work. You've all got my email address, and that would be great to see some more student examples. And we look forward to talking to you in our next webinar. So bye from Jennifer.
Bye from Patsy.
Thank you.